lasers.
Hold on, I got more stuff going in the background here. I got
More lasers?
yeah. All right, we're a little early tonight, which is always a good thing. This is Build Your Bottom
We're
Line.
on time. Something has gone wrong.
For those of you who are new and don't know this program, I am Matt and this is Alan. This is a production of Treadstone Risk Management. We talk about tips, tricks, hacks, basically market dynamics, tips on how to run your business in the real estate and construction world. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet, help us out with the algorithm so that more people can find this show in the search. And I will scroll everywhere, well, not everywhere, but the two places you can go to follow us on the lower side of the graphic here. So what are we talking about tonight? We are talking about 5-year plans. So have you always been a fan of 5-year plans, Alan?
5-year? No.
No?
No.
Why not?
Because usually about 3 weeks into a 5-year plan, it goes right in the garbage and everything's out the window.
That's a very good insight. So yeah, there was actually this show is kind of like my inspiration, and this is a show that I've wanted to do for a while and just I haven't had the opportunity to. But it goes back to 2019. Jack Ma did a talk on like future business planning, and he talked about how the 5-year plan is kind of outmoded because of just how much change happens, right? And he's in the tech world, so like obviously tech is always changing and stuff. But there was a big bit of truth there for pretty much every industry, and it's actually become painfully apparent within the last 12 to 18 months with COVID and everything like that. As well as
the 5-year plan been going the past 18 months.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you did your 5-year plan at the beginning of 2020 in December of 2020,
you were feeling really good going into February.
I'm everyone just kind of like made a paper airplane out of it and threw it out the window, right?
No, they didn't, because there was a toilet paper shortage.
Well, that is true. You would have wasted an opportunity there, but so yeah. You saw a lot of companies that had long-term plans that basically got either put on pause or completely obliterated, right? So I wanted to talk about, all right, well, if a 5-year plan isn't something that's of like great value anymore, what do you put in its place, right? Like, so what's the difference? Like, how can you do something better to anticipate change? So
6-minute abs.
Yeah. No, because then someone will come along and make 5-minute abs, and then you're screwed.
You can't do 5-minute abs. That's insane.
Yeah. Can't get a good workout in 5 minutes. So yeah, in your estimation, Alan, other than the fact that things change pretty rapidly, what are also some of the drawbacks of 5-year plans?
Well, personnel changes usually within 5 years. So if you have a set board of directors or whatever that's part of this unbelievably important 5-year plan, chances are sometime within that 5 years they're not going to be on that board anymore.
Yeah.
Technology changes very quickly, like every 6 months. Currency and inflation changes every 6 months.
Interest rates. Yep.
Interest rates change. Yeah. So
yeah.
Property values, if you're in development, real estate development.
Yeah. So specifically to real estate, right? You're, depending on the size of your operation, you're making these long-term investments. And so the problem is that you're trying to prognosticate out 5 years, or depending on how big the project is, maybe even 10 years, and you're probably going to be way off. Like it will be insanely rare that you will actually be spot on with how you're projecting out the next 5 to 10 years. So Jack Ma's point of view was, all right, instead of having these 5-year plans that have these kind of like set in stone or almost set in stone kind of goals, right? That long-term planning process should look more like a direction, not necessarily a destination, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you plan your business around the direction, the next step is essentially trying to anticipate all of those contingencies that could get in the way of you continuing to move in that direction, as well as the possibility that that direction may no longer be valid anymore, right? Like it might not even be worthwhile heading in that direction, and you need to pivot. Okay, we've seen that specifically with home builders, right?
Yeah.
With home builders and anyone who's bearing the hard costs of construction, or at least directly affected by it. And so, lumber, fixtures, all this other stuff that we've had supply chain, like global supply chain constraints. Which, by the way, did you see the other story about? Again, we don't get too political, but it is a COVID story. The dude in China. Did you see this? The dude in China that there was one person in China that either got COVID or something like that at one of the ports, and they shut the entire port down. Did you see that?
No, I did not see that.
Yeah, that's like within the last 48 hours. Yeah, one COVID case. One of the major ports in China was basically shut down by.
Some of us have been trying to earn this company some money. So
yeah.
I was working.
As
Clearly,
opposed to
you have
reading
time
the
to
news.
read the news.
So to that extent, like that just goes to show you how fragile supply chains are, and
how worried they are about it. I mean, forget the COVID side of it. You've got microchip shortages. Mm-hmm. You've got appliance shortages, which I still have. Apparently, the appliance shortage is being caused by people suddenly wanting to redesign their kitchens. That's what I was told today.
Could be.
Which was making me giggle. But I will say this, that the cost of the refrigerator that the person was telling me about, I don't think there was a lot of people redesigning their kitchen with that refrigerator.
High or low?
Oh, like you could have bought a car for that refrigerator.
So the refrigerator actually cooks dinner for you, is what you're saying.
Either that or it goes to the grocery store and fills itself.
Now that would be something.
For the price he told me, it better go to the grocery store and fill itself.
So from that standpoint, global supply chain has been shown to be extremely susceptible to these, big disruptions. And we're also going to talk about the risk management aspect of this, because if you don't risk manage well in the present, when those shocks do come along, it's going to impact you way worse than some other company that has to deal with the same shock, but they're better risk managed, right? A perfect example of that would have been like 2007, 2008. There were a handful of financial firms that weren't as overly leveraged. Like a perfect example was, now, granted, they are still part of like the global banking system, and so it did affect them, but like a Wells Fargo back then, when they weren't evil and giving everyone credit cards that didn't want them.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, it's possible that we now know how they survived it.
Yeah. But Wells Fargo wasn't overly leveraged towards like the kind of derivatives and stuff that they were using in the lead up to the subprime crisis.
JP Morgan. So
here's the crux of it, right? So when you're setting out your 5-year plan, you have certain marks that still, or you're not going to be setting out a 5-year plan. You're setting out more of this kind of like, it's more mission statement or goal driven than it is like a specific plan, right? And so that mission statement needs to be focused enough where, still your senior level managers and stuff like that can make decisions, and they can always ask themselves, all right, is this in line with, the mission statement and the direction? But it needs to be flexible enough so that they can also pivot to be able to, change course, so to speak, at least to keep things headed in the right direction. Or, again, this will be more of a global decision process, but whether or not the actual direction needs to change, right?
Yeah.
What were you going to say on that?
Well, so I'm trying to see if I can find the article I was reading, but there was an article, and they played heavily on not so much the use of the 5-year plan, but they essentially boiled it down to, if you look at the company Deloitte, massive company. I mean, worldwide. We're in everything.
Yeah.
But this is a workspace.
Yes.
But what they said is, Deloitte gave up on the 5-year plan a long time ago. What they do is they focus on a 10 to 20 year plan, but it's based on incremental steps and goals that they want to reach in those 10 years. It's not necessarily a 10-year plan. It might be 10 one-year plans, but it's organic and it has the ability to keep changing as they go.
That was actually exactly what Jack Ma talked about. He said, lay out what you think the direction of the future looks like.
So what you're saying is Jack Ma stole my idea.
Well,
that's what I'm hearing.
Would I say that? I don't know. I mean,
I would in the lawsuit that I'm about to file.
No, we're not. Don't worry, Jack. We're not filing a lawsuit. You have way more money and better lawyers than we do.
You don't even need lawyers. You could just pay a guy to kill me and nobody would care.
Yeah. So yeah. That being said, like your short term, you can still kind of have those goals that you're shooting for, right? But every single year, you need to go back and revisit that plan to alter the direction and then set new goals for the next year. Even you need to also be agile enough so that those goals are so incremental that if, again, drawing on the 2020 example, if your goals starting in January now go out the window in March because of the lockdowns and things like that, now you have to be able to go back and on the fly revisit all of those goals from, the last 3 quarters of the year that haven't happened yet and actually sit down and change those in accordance with everything else. And so I think the answer is first, have a plan, right? Like this goes back to like have a contract, right? The contract.
Contracts.
The answer is, all right, first have a plan, right? Because if you have no plan, you're just basically kind of flying by the seat of your pants no matter what, right?
Yes.
Number 2 is have a plan that, include your stakeholders, right? So like senior level people within your organization, if you have consultants, especially risk management consultants, as well as, attorneys and or, tax planning people and accountants, they should all be involved in this process in such a way that they can at least tell you what's possible, right? Like what's manageable.
Especially if you're planning on big changes. If you're talking about, if you're changing office furniture, people should have a little bit of a say in what you're doing. But if you're gonna go from a 50,000 square foot building to a 500,000 square foot building, there's a lot more people that need to know, and they need to guide. You're going to need real estate agents, and your insurance company is sure as hell going to want to know you're doing that. Inspectors are going to want to know that. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you have to take into account in the risk management side of it. You can't just on a whim say, all right, well, we're going to buy a whole new fleet of trucks. Whoa, what?
Yeah. Again, the plan in aggregate, like where you're headed, might call for that. But again, it's probably a bad move to like buy that fleet all in one fell swoop or even in one fiscal period, right? And again, that also depends on like tax considerations, which, by the way, we're not tax attorneys or accountants. So don't listen to us. We don't give tax advice. But
or pay taxes. Am I right? High five.
Yeah. My taxes are current. Thank you very much.
So what year?
Yeah. But so, like you might want to stage that out, and you have to think about contingencies along the way. Okay, so let's talk. Let's take that. Buying a new fleet of vehicles. Part of it, right? So say you're buying those fleet of vehicles in, 3 tranches, 1 per year over the next 3 years. You have to ask yourself, all right, what happens after year 1 if we don't need the vehicles anymore, right? What happens after year 1 if we find out that we actually need more vehicles than we had planned to purchase, right? How are we going to finance that? Where are we going to find the capital for it?
Here's the most important thing you need to know before you even do any of that. How much do you need to make in that vehicle on a yearly basis to make the purchase worth it? I mean, that's one thing I think a lot of business owners don't take into account.
Yeah.
They see a shiny truck, but they don't take into account what it costs to operate that vehicle every day, every week, every month. I mean, if you send a truck and a man out, you need to know, okay, he has to bill out $800 in a day for me to turn a profit on that truck, or whatever the case. I mean, every business is different, but you have that's like number one thing you need to know before you even start planning on buying new vehicles is how much does that vehicle cost you?
Yeah.
Because a $30,000 truck does not cost you $30,000. There's maintenance, fuel, insurance, manpower, parts, accessories in some cases. If you need to run, if you need to run generators and welders off the back of that truck, those are all fixed costs that are involved in the purchase of a vehicle.
Yeah, and so that's a good point because the KPIs that I was agreeing with you. I take a compliment, damn it.
I did. I took it and I added on my own ego.
So the key performance indicators that you're keying in on, okay, again, have them, right? Like this doesn't mean that you're not going to have key performance indicators and just kind of whatever, right? Like you're going to want to make sure that you actually know, okay, under the current environment, what does this look like? How do we operate profitably? The other question that you have to ask is, all right, well, what happens if it all goes to hell, right? Like what's the worst case scenario?
What's your out?
Say after year one, right, you have to then divest yourself of those vehicles, basically regurgitate them after you already purchased them and put them into service. What does that look like, right? Or if there's a drop in demand, but you anticipate it's going to be temporary, what's it going to cost to, idle those vehicles and just keep them on hand so that when you think that demand is going to pick back up again, that you can then put them back into service, right? Mm-hmm. And all of the risk management that's associated with that, maintaining them and making sure that they're in a place where they're not going to get stolen or banged up or anything like that, as well as, when you go to put them back into service, what does that look like? So that's a really good example.
Especially if it's been idled for a while. There's all kinds of things you got to do to an idled vehicle to put it back in service. Mm-hmm. Ask any diesel mechanic.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, and so to that point, like that is very much a use case based scenario. So that has to do with like all of your individual operations. You kind of have to go through that almost like war game kind of mentality, right?
Tic-tac-toe.
Even if you're the person calling the shots, right? You're the president and CEO, or if you have a board and the board is calling the shots, they need to bring in people that are at least providing some information, and you can walk through those contingencies. Okay, what about if this? What about if this? What about if that? What does our plan then look like into the future? There's also again, you also have to game plan or at least look at the contingencies of what the global economic framework looks like, right? We talked about interest rates, inflation, taxes are somewhat of a global economic consideration.
If you're an importer, tariffs; exporter, tariffs.
Yep. Yeah. If again, construction, real estate, if you have to bring in material, right? What happens if your main supplier is offline, right? Do you have to just sit there and wait and twiddle your thumbs, or can you find a secondary supplier?
That is something that happened. That was happening in Europe and Asia for a while. Is the whole manufacturing facilities were being shut down. That's really killed the supply chain in the U.S. And a lot of guys didn't plan for it and were kind of sitting around going, "Well, I guess we got nothing to do until they reopen."
Yeah, and that was also that's also something that came about talking about like the positives and negatives of the kind of like globalized supply chain that we have, right? Like all of these things, like on-demand shipping, low inventory models and things like that. From a risk management standpoint, or let me say from a business standpoint, they sound really great, right? Because it decreases overhead. You can operate more profitably that way. But you have to acknowledge the fact that it does put you at other risks than you had prior. And so those risks are associated with, again, say you can't drop ship all of your products. Say you can't source all of your material for a job from one supplier or the suppliers that you're used to. You need plan B. And in many cases, you need plan B, plan C, plan D. And not all of those are going to have the same objective, right? Like, so when you adjust course from plan A to plan B, your objective is probably going to change too, because again, that has implications in terms of profitability, whether or not you're going to be able to handle the same amount of capacity and be as productive, where you're located and doing work. That's a big deal, man. Like, this is also some basic risk management just from the standpoint of, like, you have a physical location somewhere. Say you're in the Midwest, right? And you get hit by a freaking tornado. Now what? Right? Do you have an alternative place that you can set up shop?
Well, I mean, contractors firsthand from all the municipalities being shut down. How many of you had luck getting inspectors to show up on job sites when you needed them, or getting the permits you needed to start the job? What was your backup plan to that? Because I'm sure most of you guys paid when you're not doing any work. No homeowner's going to pay you to do a kitchen if you're not doing a kitchen. Well, unless you're buying a freaking refrigerator, that's the cost of a car. And I'm sure you're doing work.
I sense a little jealousy with this refrigerator.
Well, no, it's you do not realize how poor you are until somebody tells you what they spent on a refrigerator.
Yeah, no, it definitely puts your life in perspective sometimes.
I am not buying Amazon anytime soon, I can tell you that.
Well, so those are all really valid points. It's you have to think of that contingency planning ahead of time, because by the time it actually happens, and here's the other thing is, like, don't wait for those circumstances to show themselves before you pivot, right? You have to have consistent reevaluation of not just whether or not you're hitting those short-term metrics, but whether or not you can continue to expect to hit those short-term metrics. And if you see things adjusting, I mean, the housing market right now, it could go a number of different ways, because there is, and again, one of the largest implications or considerations is, government changes, right? Like regulatory changes. We've seen with the lockdowns and stuff like that. We've seen it with the eviction moratorium. We've seen it with the suspension of rent payments and things like that. All of those go into also this consideration, because what's housing going to look like, right? If you're a contractor or you're a real estate investment and development person in a certain regional locale, and most of, if not all, your business is done there, what happens if that market falls apart?
Well, there was an article today about the housing market in New Jersey is starting to see that correction already, where the housing prices were through the roof, and now they're starting to come back down again because supply is now catching up with demand, and people are now willing to wait. They're willing to hold and see what happens and not overpay anymore. So if you were starting a real estate firm under the impression that, the market's just going to take off, what's your plan now?
Yeah, right. And if you were looking to start in one region, or if you're currently operating in one region, do you have the capacity to diversify, right? And work in, like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, and the nature of housing and real estate in general is, there's obviously like global systemic issues that can affect you, but it's also still a very regional market. So, maybe you have to go to and be nimble enough. What's funny is, like, when a lot of these things happen, the most nimble organizations are the ones where it's like, the contractor, it's just themselves, right? Or they just have a small crew. they can pick up and drive to, whatever. We're here I'll use New Jersey as an example. If New Jersey market's not great, they can pick up and drive to New York. They can pick up and drive to Pennsylvania, or even like DC or Virginia, right? They can move to where the business is. If you're a larger organization, do you also have that capacity where you can, pivot? Or if demand is still there, but it's just not keeping up the way you need it to in a certain region, can you just go down to like a skeleton operation there and move the bulk of your resources to a different region and kind of ramp up in that area?
And that's another thing to that's actually another thing to remember. If you're going to switch to skeleton crews, if you're going to quote unquote temporarily lay people off and with the promise of work starting back, what's your plan for when they don't come back? Because you got to remember something, and we've said this or at least I've said this in a ton of other podcasts. It doesn't matter if you think you're a big family. Your employees, the only thing they care about is their paycheck. And if you're not giving it to them, they're not hanging around.
Yeah, putting food on the table, man. That's all they care about, right? And so, yeah, that's a huge consideration is, labor shortages, right? That's also something that we're dealing with right now. And again, we don't get too political. You can blame it on, unemployment payments. You can blame it on, lazy millennials or whatever you want to blame it on. But it is what it is, right? Like it's here. And if you're running an operation, how you gonna deal with it? Yeah. Where do you go, right? Like, how are you going to fill that gap? So something that also has to be considered is you have to stay within your core competencies, right? Like, don't think that you have to do something that's completely foreign to what you're able to do, or don't think that that's something that's going to be there, right? Like, if you are in one line of work, if you're in one industry, don't expect that you can just completely pivot and move to a different area, because it might not be there. You might not have the experience or the resources to do it.
Or the equipment.
God forbid you try and do it with the wrong equipment or experience and you end up worse off because whatever, the building's messed up, or, the final product isn't to the owner's liking, right? Like, all of those things have to be taken into consideration.
Just because you're a roofer doesn't mean you're a tree trimmer.
Yes. Yeah. Or, whatever, pick your trade, pick your, or if you're a GC that works on residential, don't think that you can just up and take, a $3 million commercial job, or vice versa, right? Like, those things aren't necessarily directly translatable.
No.
The other thing to think about is your actual business model itself. Could you transition to a different business model and still be kind of in that core competency? So again, not getting too political, but invoking, the Trump organization's name. A number of years back, Trump doesn't really do development anymore, right? The development projects that has the Trump name on it, it's mostly a licensing deal. And what they did was they make the money on the licensing deal for the name, and then built into the contract is a requirement that their real estate management arm comes in, and for at least 2, 3, 4 years after the project is completed, that's who's going to be doing the real estate management, right? And so that's a huge consideration as well. Could you, materially change how your business is constructed, or how you actually execute on doing your business as a reaction to, a change in the marketplace, right? Flippers run into that a lot too, right? Like, if you're a flipper, sometimes the market in the area that you're in is just not a flipper's market, right? Like, it's imbalanced against you. So can you become a landlord?
If you're a flipper, could you at least make sure you install the doors correctly?
Yeah.
I have seen some things that really, like, come on. Like, are you unfamiliar with how a door works? That's all. I'm gonna leave it at that. But some of y'all know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, we all know that one guy. But yeah, like, if your core competency is in flipping, can you at least temporarily if not permanently, transition to, say, being more of a, a landlord, like a lesser of property, as opposed to just kind of those quick flips and making that vig on actually rehabbing a property and then sending it off on its way, right? Which again, that takes a lot of consideration. Like, you can't just flick a switch and be like, all right, well, yesterday I was a flipper and today I'm a landlord. Like, that's not the way that works. You know,
there's a whole list of other complications once you start having to take care of somebody else.
Yes, yeah, and again, not to like nerd out on the insurance aspect of it, but
if there's one thing that we should probably do that, as that's what we do for a living.
Yeah.
Instead of ranting and telling people how they need to focus on their taxes and
yeah. Well, that is our core competency.
Competency might be a strong word, but it is what we do for a living, and it's kind of why we're here to, the insurance side is what we're supposed to be telling people. Just an FYI in case you're unfamiliar with the show that we do.
So, if you do decide to pivot in terms of your business model, your insurance company might not even want to insure you anymore, right? So, or at the very least, the price may change because, the risk of, rehabbing or renovating buildings may be completely different and a completely different price to, say, being a property manager or a landlord operation.
Or right? If you are a consultant, and I've run into this now, I think two or three times, you're a consultant and you do, HR consulting and everything, and you suddenly say, hey, I'm also going to do safety consulting. Let me tell you what happens when you tell your insurance company that. You very quickly are looking for a new insurance company.
Yeah, or now you need two policies instead of one, right? Like, we also, I run into that a lot too, where,
and then you have a guy like me running around like a lunatic trying to find somebody who will cover it.
I have one account right now where we're going through the renewal, and they operate a nonprofit, and as part of the nonprofit is like housing, right? So they made the assumption that, oh, well, we're going to buy this house on spec through the nonprofit, but we're going to rent it out and create a revenue source for the nonprofit. That's fine. They're not barred from doing that. But in the insurance company's eyes, those are two completely different types of risks, right? Running a nonprofit versus being a landlord are completely different, and they have different prices and different considerations and everything like that. So that's the other thing is, like, again, whatever your core competency is, if all of a sudden you're going to go out and do something else that's not necessarily directly related to that thing that you do normally, there's a lot of moving parts that, again, if you don't do the groundwork ahead of time, you could end up thinking that it's an option when push comes to shove, and you're like, things actually fall apart, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll just go do this other thing. And you're like, well, newsflash, you can't do it profitably. And you're like, all right, well, now what, right? That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Yes.
I would say on a specific note, especially with real estate investors and developers, really diversifying those kind of regions or locales that you're investing or developing in is once you can do it. Okay, again, don't spread yourself too thin, but once you can do it, that is a big consideration, right? Do not be held hostage by the market dynamics of one regional market if you have the opportunity to actually, go to another market, or at the same time operate in both, and that way maybe one is good and one is bad and they offset each other, right? Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and make sure you can participate in both markets. Don't, because there's also been stories of people who decide that they're going to buy a house in another state, and then they never travel to where they just bought that house, and they have no idea what's happening to that house. And they say, "Oh well, we're running out. We have a property management company." Have you ever met the property management company? Do you know if they're even showing up? Do you know if Yeah. Do you know if the people? Do you know if the like? I mean, do you know if the people who you're renting it to aren't then turning around and subleasing it out as an Airbnb?
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, if you have an Airbnb running in a property that you think is not being used as an Airbnb, your insurance company isn't going to cover it at all. So if
Well,
it
and
get
the Airbnb example is a perfect one for COVID, because there was actually there was a couple of businesses that were predicated on teaching people how to find unoccupied apartments and signing the lease on those apartments, and then essentially making
oh
positive
yes,
cash flow also off of Airbnb-ing them, right?
mm-hmm.
And so what you ended up with was people that had like 40 apartment leases and no one was traveling, or no one was, or the other thing was, at one point in time, because of like the restrictions and the moratoriums and stuff, someone like rented an Airbnb for like a week, and then things locked down, and then the person was stuck in the Airbnb, and they were like, well, I didn't sign any contract, so I'm not paying you. So
Mm-hmm.
you have someone living in your Airbnb who's also not paying you any kind of money, if the opportunity were there to actually replace them with a, a paying customer. So that business model showed how susceptible it was. I wouldn't say it's a bad business model, but if you're completely leveraged towards making 40 rent payments every month, and you can't rent out any of those units on Airbnb, where are you, right? Like, you're up a creek.
Not just any
Which,
creek.
well, there are some specific creeks that you might be up. Yeah.
without the necessary equipment to get that boat back down.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was another point I was going to make in terms of that, because you came up with a really good example, or at least you piqued my thought process there.
Airbnbs. Because I get asked that a lot about Airbnbs. Well, Airbnb has their own insurance policy, sort of. I
Yeah.
mean, it's very very minimal, and anybody who's ever lost a house to a fire knows that minimal is going to pay for maybe the kitchen to be replaced,
Mm.
but this ain't going to cover the rest of it, and your insurance company is not going to cover it either because you didn't tell them that you were renting it out to begin with.
Yeah. And also that that insurance policy is typically geared just towards the liability side of it. And so what may happen is, also, if you have a homeowner's policy on that property, and you have the Airbnb policy, you're like, all right, I'm covered for liability, right? And then the tenant at the time does something and causes damage. The property policy could push back, especially if it's specifically excluded. The other thing is, if your Airbnb is a part of like a condo association or something like that. We're getting a little far off field, but if your Airbnb is a part of a condo association or something, the condo association formation documents may require or forbid things, and so that's also something that you need to take into consideration as far as that goes, especially if you have an operation that has multiple Airbnbs or properties that you're renting out and things like that. But so I remember what I was going to say. So if you're looking for diversification, say you're an individual investor or you're a small group of investors that typically focus on a certain geographic area, there's also the option of things like 1031 exchanges that offer you the ability to put cash into real estate investment. There's also tax implications. So again, we're not tax attorneys or accountants, so you always have to consult those people. But you can put money into those, and those will in fact give you diversification within them, because a lot of them are spread out across a number of different areas and regions. And they also have varying levels of debt that they carry. And so some of them may be 95% cash financed, other ones might be 70 or 60% cash financed, which gives, again, all those considerations where some of them are more protected, some of them give a better return because there's a little bit more debt in the mix. So it takes a professional, and we actually have someone that we're trying to schedule to come on to talk about 1031 exchanges. but for real estate investors, that's a really good tool to get yourself diversification if you yourself can't, get to all these different metro areas in order to, look at homes or commercial properties, Yeah. So, what else did I have to say?
We have a lot of guests coming up. That's one thing we have to remember to start pushing.
We do.
Have guest
Yes.
speakers coming up.
Next week, we're going to be talking about what? Electrical contracting?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I threatened him, so hopefully he'll be on.
Asked insistent.
No, I threatened him. I know where he lives. I can. His choices were to hook up the camera, or I can hook it up for him, but he ain't gonna like it.
Yeah. And then in 2 weeks, we have someone coming to talk to us about the real estate market in, where the heck is he located?
California.
Out of Cali. Okay. Again, typical, like, huge dollar amounts in terms of the property that's out there. It's going to be interesting to speak. And you know what? In 2 weeks, hell, the real estate market could be completely different in that locale. But we're going to be talking to him about that. Who else we got coming up? I got someone who's going to be on talking about lending. So essentially business lending as well as development lending. So that should be a good one.
And hopefully it'd be nice if we could get a labor attorney on.
Yes, yeah. And we do want to do, so like as much as we don't want to get political, we do want to do an episode on labor law as far as it relates to COVID. Specifically, vaccination, mandates. Work from home, mandates, yes, yeah, the whole nine. So that's going to be coming down the pike there. So our one contact needs a little bit of time because things are obviously crazy at the moment. But yeah, so we have a whole slate of guests coming up. I'm trying to remember if I had any other points as far as business planning went. A lot of it, I would say, is rely on the professionals that you have that are helping you out. Okay, the last thing you want to be doing is scrambling to get these people to help you when everyone else is scrambling for help. It's so much better to do the work ahead of time and have that planning in place, or at least have some idea of
have a framework for planning at least.
Yes.
I mean, it's, even if it's just jotting notes down in a notebook so that you have, have a plan A and a plan B. Because, a lot of people, this shutdown caught a lot of people with their pants down. And, like here in New Jersey, they said, almost 40% of all businesses are out of business now because they weren't expecting it.
And I cannot stress this enough. Risk management is the key. Like, this kind of planning is part of risk management, but there's all other aspects of risk management, both financial and operational, that go into, you need to risk manage yourself well before this stuff happens and throughout it. But it's really important that you risk manage yourself before, because you could end up stuck where you see something you could do, but you just, you don't have the capital, you don't have the manpower, you're forced into finishing contracts that, work against you pivoting and moving in the direction that you want. And to your point, Alan, a lot of that, mismanaged risk management led to not just companies that, it impacted their bottom line.
That's us. We're trying to build it, not impact it.
It threatened the actual existence of the company itself, and they had to close their doors, right? So all of those things, like, just look at it, it's kind of I mean, it's not necessarily the focus of our show, but look at the restaurant industry and the hospitality industry. They were stuck. Like, what were they going to do? Right? Like, if you were like a fine dining restaurant or something like that, you were like, what are you going to do? Your run rate of cash just to operate on, a single day is just an exorbitant amount of money compared to the standard restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, fine dining restaurants were not designed to be takeout restaurants.
Mm.
They had that was quite an alteration for a lot of I mean, I don't know if anybody saw it, but I'm sure many of you saw the commercials running of local chambers of commerces begging people to frequent these establishments because
Yep.
they were going under like crazy.
Yep.
And you've heard of all the ones that were breaking the rules just to stay in business.
Oh yeah. Well, and the reason why I bring that up is because there was actually, us being closely geographically to New York City. Like, obviously there's a ton of, like, there's a couple of Michelin star restaurants, a ton of 4-star restaurants that are there, and a lot of them essentially closed their doors and said, look, we can't ever reopen unless we know we can reopen without restrictions. And so even the present kind of like middle ground we're in right now, I mean, they're already under it in New York City. Like, it's vaccine requirement in order to go dine indoors in New York City. So, even under those restrictions, some of those restaurants are still choosing to stay closed, because to restart those operations would take a lot of cash that maybe they don't have on hand, or if they have investors backing them and it's like the chef's signature restaurant, but they have money people behind them, the money might not be there because there's no confirmation that what exists today in terms of the status quo is going to continue or get any better, right? So I mean, we're running through that now with the Delta variant. Like, what does it look like? Do we go back to the way it was in early 2020, or is it somewhere like halfway back? Is it something that we can just weather the storm and then get past? I don't know, but that's a big consideration. So you can't necessarily think that, oh well, we'll just be able to like move on to this next thing. Especially, we talk about it all the time. Developers and contractors are especially susceptible to this, and bad risk management is covered by a good economy, right? So like a good economy can make up for the fact that you're poorly risk managed because more business is being done, revenue is rising, stock prices inflate, things like that, right? Rent prices and
Yeah, it's
real
easy
estate prices go up, right?
when you can float jobs to stay in business. It's easy, but when those floater jobs dry up, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's that you're just waiting for that first domino to fall, right? For all the rest of them to fall, and so when times are good, you don't necessarily have to worry about that so much because you could always get that next job in order to fill in, right? But if you're poorly risk managed, if there's a lot of waste, if there's a lot of claims, if there's a lot of just money that gets poorly used, or again from the financial risk management standpoint, if you're overly leveraged or you have bad credit and you're paying high interest rates, again when the economy is headed up, all that stuff, the economy can cover for that. It's when things get difficult that you actually find out who was doing a good job of running their shop. And unfortunately, we found out that a lot of people weren't.
Yeah.
And they won't open their doors again. They'll go work for someone else, probably. Or try and start again from square one. But
Yep.
anywho, any other points?
No, I think this has really been lighthearted and fun today. We've really brought people's hopes and dreams up.
Kind of doom and gloom, I know. I said it offline, but props on the Aliens 2 backdrop there.
Yeah, listen, when you talk about the death of something, you gotta go with him yelling, "Game over, man! Game over!"
So we got some good guests coming up. We're trying to schedule even more. Look, if you watch this program and you work in the real estate investment, development, management, or construction industry, we would love to talk to you, especially if you have something that you're seeing on the ground, or if you have a different kind of slant.
Yeah, if you do something cool.
Oh, totally forgot. We also reached out to a insurtech startup that has a dashboard for IoT connected devices. So think,
Oh,
smoke
yes.
detectors, carbon monoxide, water leak detection, stuff like
Yes.
that. And
That one's going to be interesting.
what's beautiful about it is it's agnostic. So as long as your devices can communicate via API with that dashboard, you can get them all put onto the same dashboard, and it's international. So if you have properties domestically spread out or internationally, you can keep tabs from one central location or even mobily, which is fantastic. So yeah, all kinds of good stuff coming up. All right, cool. With that, we will be back next week on Thursday at 8:30. As usual, I won't put the banner back up, but please help us out.
Like, subscribe, share,
Yeah,
notification, hit the bell. Hit
even
me if you want.
if you're watching this on like Twitter, okay, and you are either on Facebook or YouTube, please hop over there and give us a subscribe or a follow, because that really helps us on those platforms as well, even if you don't use them quite often. If you have an account over there, help us out. And yeah, that's all I got. So we will see you next Thursday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and we will be talking some electrical engineering.
We better be, otherwise I know where he lives.
Yeah. Tune in to find out.
We'll either be live on location or we'll be sitting right here.
Knock, knock. Have a good evening, everyone.